Gale, Yellow Brick Road Review. This horror riff on The Wizard of Oz moves like Molasses and is atrociously dull. The horror genre always goes through waves of different subgenres exploding in popularity, and the current trend is reimagining classic childhood tales into terrifying journeys. The most notable still remains the interconnected twisted childhood universe kickstarted by Winnie the Pooh Bloodhoney, while going beyond it with everything from Screamboat to Cinderella's Revenge. Now there's Gale Yellow Brick Road, Daniel Alexander's riff on L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which might just be one of the worst efforts yet. Between a script that drags the viewer through its 27-minute cycle of psychological thriller tropes direction that isn't quite as artful as it wants to be, and a cast with no idea what kind of film they're making, it's one of the most deviant abominations of horror twists on unlikely source materials. Co-written by Alexander, who also makes his feature directorial debut on the project Gale Yellow Brick Road, centers on Emily, a troubled young artist who has been experiencing a series of recurring nightmares involving a woman named Dorothy and her grandmother. This has led to Emily sketching bizarre imagery and shutting herself out from the world until she discovers a journal seemingly penned by her mother. Finding writings of an alternate realm and a phone number for a mental institution, Emily heads to the secluded facility in the hopes of learning answers about her family's past. However, as she confronts the sinister head of the institution and becomes trapped amid a storm, the line between reality and dream begin to blur as she discovers her own ties to Dorothy and the mysterious world of Oz. On paper, Gale Yellow Brick Road has a lot of elements to make for an interesting spin on its classic source material. Many Wizard of Oz adaptations have only loosely played with the idea of it being a dreamland rather than a real place, to which Alexander and co-writer Matthew R. Ford seek to offer a different take. However, the script alone proves to be one of the movie's biggest missteps, with just how confused it is. There is virtually no time spent on building Emily up as an individual in the build-up to her eventual journey to Oz, as the movie clearly looks to keep these extra layers as mysteries to be unveiled along the way. But where Dorothy worked as an anchor for audiences to be fascinated in exploring the colorful land of Oz, given she was such a dreamer, Emily already feels like such a scattered mess that it's easy to believe her version of the world would be a nightmare. In some ways, it almost feels like Alexander was more interested in making a Silent Hill movie than he was in a Wizard of Oz reimagining. Its psychological-driven storytelling clearly wants to deeper tie Emily's broken psyche to Oz's fate, essentially turning the mystical land into a metaphor for mental illness, but with nothing really to say about it. Alexander and Ford earn some respect for trying to do something different with Baum's material, but in some ways it almost would have been better if they got less heady with Gale Yellow Brick Road. Say what you will about the TCU, the filmmakers have a better understanding of how to deliver a deliriously entertaining update on their sources of inspiration, from the gruesome slasher thrills of Winnie at the Pooh to the surprisingly thoughtful yet still grisly Bambi the Reckoning. What makes this tonal confusion even more egregious is just how slow Gale Yellow Brick Road's pacing is. Moving slower than molasses being poured out of a jar, the first half of the movie is an annoying slog of being 20 steps ahead of Emily and wishing Alexander and Ford would just get to the point. If it weren't for the occasional attempt at a jump scare, this movie could easily put one to sleep with just how dull it plays out. In some ways, it almost feels like Alexander was more interested in making a Silent Hill movie than he was in a Wizard of Oz reimagining. Amidst its issues, one thing that Alexander can be commended for with Gale Yellow Brick Road is successfully capturing the dreamlike atmosphere of his story. Though not quite on the same level as Denis Villeneuve or Oz Perkins, directors who similarly love squeezing every ounce of visual glamour out of a scene, the debuting filmmaker still makes a fairly sumptuous feast of his imagery. This can further be felt in his primarily practical approach to the movie's effects, which similarly feel ambitious and inventive for such an independent title. Admittedly, the titular Yellow Brick Road is little more than a handful of bright yellow bricks scattered along a forest road with leaves over them, but new character patches, seemingly a combo of the Scarecrow and Tin Man, is an intricately designed suit, while the flying monkeys are easily the most chilling representation of the Wicked Witch's army yet. It's just truly a shame that Alexander and Ford's loftier ideas for Gale Yellow Brick Road never properly come together. The creepy imagery in the first act improperly sells just how dull the movie ultimately ends up being for the majority of its overlong runtime, and while its snail-like pacing and lackluster acting fail to make its psychological themes land with anything more than a mute thud, Gale Yellow Brick Road is now in theaters.